Welcome to Resilience Strategies for Eco-Grief during the holidays. You may be noticing that the sun is setting a little bit earlier each day and the mornings are cold, and that can only mean one thing. The winter holidays are right around the corner. And for many of us, that means feelings of excitement and joy and happiness as we gather with friends and family and celebrate rituals that are meaningful in our lives. But for others, it can mean an increase in feelings of seasonal affective disorder, which is when our mood is deeply impacted by changes in the weather. But seasonal affective disorder is not the only thing that can be impacting our mood and mindset this time of year. We also have to be aware of our feelings of eco-grief. Eco-grief, also known as climate grief, is a psychological response to loss caused by environmental destruction or climate change. These strong feelings can have a negative impact on our well-being and can be triggered by events like a global pandemic or natural disasters. Eco-grief can also be triggered by the holiday season. As we shop, cook, and gather, we can become acutely aware of things like excessive consumption, plastic packaging, food waste, and the impact that our travel plans have on the environment. Eco-grief can also be triggered when we anticipate sharing space with family or friends who do not believe in climate change. It's important to recognize that this type of grief is natural and a legitimate response to ecological loss, and likely to become more common in our future. The emerging model of climate grief suggests that many people may process their climate despair through the stages of grief, the same stages of grief when we experience the loss of a loved one. People with eco-grief may also experience other feelings as well. Feelings such as anger or frustration, particularly toward the people who don't acknowledge climate change, or maybe even toward older generations for not making more progress. Eco-grief can also include feelings of existential dread, guilt and shame related to your own past behavior, possible post-traumatic stress reactions after climate events, feelings of depression and anxiety, grief and sadness, and also obsessive thoughts about the climate and the impact that it's having on our lives. These feelings can be difficult to manage, and they can contribute to secondary issues like sleep problems, appetite changes, and difficulty concentrating. As we face discouraging reports from the news on a daily basis, stories of loss of biodiversity, fear of what's being put into our food and into our soil, we can end up feeling pretty overwhelmed. With everything that's going on, it can be really hard to see how we as an individual can make a difference. One thing that can help is to really think about it in terms of your circle of control and influence. There are two circles we can use to categorize our worries. The circle of concern, which is the things that we care about, and the circle of influence, the things that we care about and can affect. The circle of concern encompasses everything you might be worried about, including your health, your family, your finances, and, in this case, climate change. When we focus more on things we can control, this allows us to invest our emotional energy in the issues that we find most important and effective. In order to start allocating our energy a little bit more directly, we'll need to be able to decipher what falls both inside and outside our circle of influence. If you find that you're having a lot of worries, it can be helpful to sit down with a pen and paper and start to map out what are the areas of your life that you feel like you can control, and what are the areas that you feel like you can't. Once you've figured out what falls inside your circle of influence, you'll want to concentrate your energy on anything that falls within that circle, while at the same time practicing mindfulness and acceptance for all those concerns that fall outside the circle. Using the circle of influence in this way, you can identify where you need to set and maintain better boundaries with yourself and others, and you can also focus your energy on a larger end goal. Once we've identified our circle of influence, we'll need to prioritize our self-care to sustain it. There needs to be a balance in replenishing ourselves. The more we tend to ourselves, mind, body, and spirit, the greater our capacity will be to make an impact and have some meaningful change. Another important factor that comes out of looking at the circle of influence is it helps us identify where individual responsibility ends and systemic responsibility begins. We know that we can't yoga our way out of climate change, but there are some self-care strategies that can help you build your resilience. The first is to feel your grief. Allow yourself to feel the full range of emotions that get stirred up for you when you think about this subject. It can be really important to help you then identify rituals and practices that can help you make meaning of what's happening And it also creates a shared language amongst communities so that you have a way to put your feelings into words and not feel so isolated. The second strategy to build coping resilience is to befriend discomfort. For a lot of us, sitting in hard feelings is not something we have a lot of experience in doing. And so to get better at this, we can practice mindfulness tools, self-acceptance, and other grounding strategies that help us stay in the moment even when we want to run. The next important step we can take is to find supportive community. When we find other people who think and feel the same way that we do, we are validated and know that we're not alone in what we're experiencing. Once we know that we're not alone, we can take the steps to organize even further, finding support groups or other activity and service groups that help us take action in the areas that we can. Another important resiliency tool is practicing gratitude. Finding things that we're grateful for can help shift our mindset into more positive spaces and help us find solutions that weren't there before. Similarly, we can practice gratitude while we're out in nature. We know that nature is restorative and healing, and so it's really important during this time of grief that we actually immerse ourselves in nature so that we can be connected to the force that is so powerful. The next thing that we can do is make sure that we're taking action when and where we can. Looking for opportunities to make change in our daily routines and communicating those changes to the people around us to inspire and encourage them to do the same. There are lots of small action steps that we can take around the holidays to make sure that our celebrations are more sustainable. For example, instead of wrapping gifts in paper that may be recycled or thrown away, maybe we can find a nice piece of fabric to wrap the gift in. And we can make sure that our table is filled with many plant-based dishes. If our holiday celebrations involve any lighting displays, we can make sure that we're using LED bulbs to preserve energy. And finally, we can make sure that if we decide to travel, we're thoughtful about where, how, and how far we're going so that we minimize our carbon footprint. Finally, we can remember to vote. When we step into the ballot box, we can make sure that we're choosing candidates and initiatives that protect the environment and align with our values. And we can also vote with our feet and with our wallet, making sure that we're choosing companies that are making sustainable and good choices for our planet. We can also make sure that our communities are engaging and supporting coping strategies for eco-grief and eco-anxiety and allowing space for this conversation to continue. It's also important that we approach this issue through a social justice lens, recognizing that certain communities are more impacted and burdened by these issues than others. Finally, we can make sure that we're implementing trauma-informed approaches when we respond to natural disasters. The challenge that we all face is realizing that we have to tolerate this in-between. We have to strike this uneasy balance between taking in the science and not getting overwhelmed or fatalistic about what's happening, and at the same time feeling hopeful enough to take action, both individually and in our communities.